Welcome to Midnight Narratives. Tonight, we've gathered our most chilling stories in one place. Tales of true crime, haunted whispers, and the mysteries that refuse to sleep. Dim the lights, settle in, and let the night speak. The call came in on February 14th, 2019, Valentine's Day. What started as a routine ice fishing expedition in northern Minnesota would uncover one of the most disturbing and baffling cases in the state's criminal history. Two bodies, perfectly preserved beneath 3 feet of ice, sitting upright and smiling as if they were posing for a photograph that would never be taken. Tom Erickson had been ice fishing on Lake Wendigo for over 30 years. That morning, like countless others, he began drilling holes through the thick February ice, searching for the perfect spot. But as his auger broke through at coordinates that would later become evidence marker number 1, he saw something that would haunt him forever. Beneath the crystalline surface, illuminated by his headlamp, sat 2 figures, a man and woman appearing to be in their 30s, both wearing formal evening wear, positioned as if sitting at an invisible dinner table. Their eyes were open, faces frozen in serene smiles, hands clasped together on what would have been the surface of the table. Erickson later told investigators he initially thought it was an elaborate prank, some kind of underwater mannequin display. It wasn't until he saw the man's wedding ring glinting in the lamplight that the horrific reality set in. Sheriff's Deputy Maria Gonzalez was the first responder on scene. Her initial report, filed at 7:43 a.m., described what she called the most surreal crime scene of my career. The Hennepin County Sheriff's Department immediately cordoned off a 50-yard radius around the discovery site. What puzzled investigators from the start wasn't just the positioning of the bodies, but the complete absence of any obvious point of entry into the lake. The ice formation appeared undisturbed, with no visible cracks, holes, or weak spots that could explain how 2 adult bodies had ended up perfectly positioned 3 feet beneath the surface. Dr. James Morrison, the county coroner, estimated the ice had been solid for at least 6 weeks, with no thawing periods recorded in the area during that time. The victims were identified as David and Sarah Chen, both 34 years old, from Minneapolis. The couple had been reported missing by Sarah's sister on January 8th, exactly 5 weeks before their discovery. According to family members, the Chens had been experiencing marital difficulties and had planned a romantic getaway to work on their relationship. Their car, a blue Honda Accord, was found in the parking lot of the nearby Pine View Resort, where they had checked in on January 6th, but never checked out. Resort staff reported seeing the couple leave their room around 8 p.m. on January 7th, dressed formally, David in a black suit, Sarah in an elegant red dress that matched exactly what they were wearing when found. Security footage from the resort's lobby showed them walking hand in hand toward the exit, both smiling broadly. It was the last confirmed sighting of them alive. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the state's lead forensic pathologist, conducted the autopsies 3 days after the bodies were recovered. Her findings defied conventional explanation. Both victims showed no signs of drowning, hypothermia, or trauma typically associated with death in frozen water. Toxicology reports revealed no alcohol, drugs, or poisons in their systems. Most puzzling was the condition of their formal wear, completely dry and pristine, as if they had been dressed moments before being discovered. The fabric showed no ice crystal formation or water damage, despite being submerged for weeks. Additionally, both bodies exhibited unusual preservation, with cellular structure indicating they had been frozen immediately after death, preventing normal decomposition. Dr. Hartwell noted in her report, "The positioning and preservation suggest the subjects were placed in their final position shortly after death, and immediately flash frozen by unknown means. As the investigation expanded, witness statements began painting a contradictory picture of the Chen's final days. Resort manager Patricia Williams insisted the couple appeared happy and relaxed during their stay, frequently seen holding hands and laughing together. However, housekeeping staff member Rosa Martinez reported hearing loud arguments coming from their room on both nights of their stay, with Sarah allegedly crying and David shouting about keeping promises and it being too late to back out. Local restaurant owner Mike Thompson claimed to have served the couple dinner on January 7th, describing them as oddly formal, and noting that Sarah barely touched her food while David kept checking his watch. Most mysteriously, elderly resident Eleanor Blackwood reported seeing the couple walking on the frozen lake around midnight on January 7th, carrying what appeared to be dining chairs and accompanied by several other figures she couldn't clearly identify in the darkness. Perhaps the most disturbing discovery came when investigators examined the ice surface surrounding the bodies. Using ground-penetrating radar and specialized photography, they uncovered an intricate pattern of markings carved into the ice, symbols and geometric shapes forming a perfect circle around where the Chens were positioned. The markings were only visible under specific lighting conditions and had been obscured by a fresh layer of ice and snow. Dr. Amanda Reeves, a forensic anthropologist consulted on the case, identified some symbols as resembling ancient Nordic runes, while others appeared to be original designs. The precision of the carving suggested the use of professional tools, and chemical analysis revealed traces of an unknown wax-like substance that had been used to fill the grooves. Most unsettling was the discovery of what appeared to be small holes drilled through the ice at specific points around the circle, as if anchoring some kind of structure that had since been removed. Despite extensive investigation involving state and federal resources, the case began to stagnate by summer 2019. Lead Detective Ray Morrison interviewed over 50 potential witnesses, examined hundreds of hours of security footage, and followed leads across 3 states. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit created a profile suggesting the crime involved multiple perpetrators with advanced knowledge of preservation techniques and possible ritualistic motivations. However, no concrete evidence emerged linking any suspects to the scene. The couple's financial records showed no unusual transactions, their phones provided no helpful data, and forensic analysis of their clothing and personal effects yielded no DNA evidence beyond their own. The investigation was further hampered by the unique nature of the preservation method. Without understanding how the bodies had been flash frozen and positioned beneath solid ice, investigators struggled to develop a coherent timeline or methodology for the crime. As the official investigation wound down, local rumors began to fill the void left by unanswered questions. Longtime residents of the area spoke in whispers about Lake Wendigo's dark history, Native American legends warning of spirits that demanded tribute, unexplained disappearances dating back to the 1800s, and reports of strange lights and sounds emanating from the frozen lake during winter months. Local historian Margaret Thornfield discovered records of similar incidents in 1923 and 1967, both involving couples found in unusual circumstances on the same lake. More disturbing were contemporary accounts from area residents reporting organized gatherings on the lake during winter nights, with participants wearing robes and carrying torches. Several witnesses described seeing elaborate temporary structures erected on the ice under cover of darkness, only to vanish by morning. Social media posts from the months before the Chen's discovery mentioned unusual activity around Lake Wendigo, with hikers reporting ceremonial music and the smell of burning herbs drifting across the frozen surface. Dr. Marcus Webb, a professor of comparative religion at the University of Minnesota, was consulted after local authorities noticed similarities between the ice markings and historical accounts of winter solstice rituals. Webb's research revealed connections to obscure Northern European traditions involving ice marriages, ceremonies where couples would pledge eternal union through ritual freezing. According to these ancient practices, participants believed they could achieve immortality by willingly submitting to preservation rituals during specific astronomical events. Webb noted that the positioning of the Chen's bodies, their formal attire, and the timing of their disappearance aligned with these historical accounts. He theorized that a modern cult might have revived these practices, possibly targeting couples experiencing relationship difficulties with promises of eternal love and unity. The professor's research uncovered online forums discussing transcendent preservation and ice-binding rituals, though their connection to the case remained speculative. 5 years later, the Chen case remains officially unsolved, classified as a double homicide with unknown perpetrators and methodology. The Hennepin County Sheriff's Department continues to receive tips annually, particularly around the anniversary of the discovery, though none have provided breakthrough leads. Lake Wendigo has been permanently closed to ice fishing and winter recreation, with warning signs posted around the perimeter. The Chen family established a memorial fund for missing persons cases, while Sarah's sister continues to advocate for renewed investigation. Detective Morrison, now retired, admits the case changed his perspective on the nature of unsolved crimes. In his final report, he wrote, "Some cases challenge our understanding of what is possible. The Chen investigation has shown me that there are still mysteries in this world that our current methods cannot solve." Local residents continue to report unusual activity around the lake during winter months, and the case has attracted attention from paranormal investigators and true crime enthusiasts worldwide, ensuring that the mystery of David and Sarah Chen's final, frozen tableau continues to haunt those who seek answers in the darkness beneath the ice. The Hendricks family had always prided themselves on punctuality. Every room in their Victorian home housed at least one timepiece: grandfather clocks, digital displays, ornate wall clocks inherited from generations past. Time was their compass, their constant companion. But on the night of October 13th, time would become their prison. Sarah Hendricks jolted awake, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for escape. Something was wrong, terribly, unnaturally wrong. The silence pressed against her eardrums with an almost physical weight, broken only by her own ragged breathing and the conspicuous absence of the familiar tick-tock that usually lulled her to sleep. She fumbled for her phone on the nightstand, squinting at the screen through bleary eyes. 3:33 a.m., the display read, its blue glow casting sickly shadows across her face. But something was off. The seconds weren't changing. The colon between the numbers didn't blink. It simply remained static, frozen in time like a photograph of the night itself. Panic crept up her spine as she shook her husband Mark awake, his confused grunt dissolving into concern as he saw her pale, terror-stricken face. Together, they crept through their home in their nightgowns and pajamas, checking every timepiece with growing dread. The antique grandfather clock in the hallway stopped at 3:33. The digital microwave display, 3:33. The battery-powered alarm clock in their daughter Emma's room, 3:33. Even their watches, their phones, everything that could measure the passage of time had surrendered to this cursed moment, trapped in amber like prehistoric insects. Their teenage son Jake stumbled downstairs, drawn by their whispered conversations, his usual teenage bravado replaced by genuine fear. 12-year-old Emma followed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her wide eyes reflecting the strange blue-tinged darkness that seemed to permeate every corner of their home. The family gathered in the living room, surrounded by the silent sentinels of stopped time, each member contributing their own tale of chronological impossibility. Mark, ever the practical engineer, attempted to rationalize the situation. Power surge, he suggested, electromagnetic pulse, solar flare. But even as the words left his lips, they sounded hollow and desperate. Emma's battery-powered travel clock had stopped too. So had Jake's mechanical watch, a gift from his grandfather. The laws of physics seemed to have taken a coffee break, leaving the Hendricks family stranded in a moment that refused to end. It was Jake who first noticed the shadows behaving strangely. At first, it seemed like a trick of the eye, a peripheral movement that vanished when looked at directly. But as they sat in terrified silence, the phenomenon became undeniable. The shadow cast by the lamp moved independently of its source, stretching and contracting like a living thing. The silhouette of their coffee table writhed across the floor, defying the static light above it. Sarah gripped Mark's hand so tightly, her knuckles turned white as bone. The shadows weren't random. They seemed purposeful, almost intelligent. They gathered in corners, pooling like spilled ink, then dispersed and reformed elsewhere. Some appeared to be watching the family, dark voids where faces should be, studying them with an attention that made their skin crawl. Emma buried her face in her mother's shoulder, refusing to look at the supernatural dance unfolding around them. The whispers started as a barely perceptible susurration like wind through autumn leaves. But there was no wind. The night outside was perfectly still, as frozen as time itself. The voices seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, sometimes close enough to feel breath on their necks, other times distant and echoing from rooms they knew were empty. Mark crept toward the kitchen, following one particularly distinct whisper that seemed to be calling his name. The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It existed in a space between definitions, unsettling in its ambiguity. As he approached the doorway, the whisper stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so complete it seemed to have weight. When he peered around the corner, the kitchen was empty, but every cabinet door stood ajar, as if invisible hands had been searching through their contents. Emma, despite her parents' protests, ventured toward the staircase, drawn by whispers that seemed to call her name in her grandmother's voice. But Grandma Rose had been dead for 3 years. As she climbed each step, the whispers grew clearer, more insistent. They spoke of secrets buried in the walls, of times when the house was young and the world was different. They promised to show her things that adults couldn't see, worlds that existed in the spaces between seconds. At the top of the stairs, Emma turned to look back down at her family, but her shadow remained at the bottom, waving at her with movements she wasn't making. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound emerged, as if even her voice had been caught in time's trap. Only when Mark bounded up the stairs and swept her into his arms did the shadow rejoin her body, snapping back like a rubber band released. As the endless 3:33 a.m. stretched on, the house itself seemed to awaken. Doors creaked open on their own, revealing empty rooms that felt occupied. The floorboards groaned under invisible footsteps that followed no discernible pattern. In the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed a tune that sounded almost like a lullaby, but wrong somehow. The melody twisted and distorted as if played backward. Objects began to move with subtle malevolence. A coffee mug slid across the counter with deliberate slowness. Family photos tilted askew on their hooks, the faces in the pictures seeming to watch the family with expressions that hadn't been there before. The grandfather clock, still frozen at 3:33, began to chime, not the proper Westminster melody, but a discordant series of notes that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. Jake, channeling his fear into determination, disappeared into the attic, and returned with an armload of dusty documents and photograph albums. His research revealed a disturbing pattern. The house's previous owners had documented similar occurrences dating back over a century. Newspaper clippings told of the Morrison family in 1923 found catatonic in their beds at dawn. All their clocks stopped at 3:33. The Blackwood family in 1967 had fled the house in the middle of the night, leaving behind only a journal entry describing the hour that swallows hours. Each family had experienced the same phenomenon, time stopping at 3:33 a.m., shadows moving independently, whispers from empty rooms. But the documents revealed something more chilling. The occurrences weren't random. They followed a pattern, appearing every 13 years like clockwork, as if the house itself had its own sinister schedule that superseded normal time. In the oldest document they found, a handwritten letter dated 1897, the original owner described the phenomenon in shaking script. The house hungers for time itself, feeding on moments stolen from the living. At 3:33, when the veil between worlds grows thin, it opens its mouth to swallow hours whole. We are not its victims. We are its witnesses, trapped in amber while it feeds. The letter went on to describe how the experience changed people, how those who lived through it were never quite the same. They spoke of feeling untethered from time afterward, of sometimes slipping between moments, of aging slower than they should. The house, it seemed, took more than just time. It took pieces of their temporal souls, keeping them forever connected to that cursed hour. As suddenly as it had begun, the phenomenon ended. Every clock in the house lurched back to life simultaneously, their hands spinning wildly to catch up with lost time. Digital displays flickered through hours of accumulated seconds in moments. The grandfather clock chimed repeatedly, as if celebrating its return to the temporal world. The whispers ceased mid-syllable, the shadows snapped back to their proper positions, and the oppressive silence lifted like fog before dawn. The family checked their phones with trembling hands. It was 6:47 a.m. They had lost over 3 hours to the hungry darkness. 3 hours that existed somewhere outside normal reality. As sunlight began to filter through their windows, painting their living room in warm, normal colors, they held each other close, grateful to be returned to the flowing river of time. But their relief was short-lived. As they cleaned up the scattered documents, Sarah's eyes fell upon Jake's calculations. If the pattern held true, if the house's hunger followed its 13-year cycle, then the next occurrence was already marked in time's calendar. Her blood ran cold as she traced the dates with her finger, counting forward from the last documented incident. She looked up at her family, Mark making coffee with shaking hands, Emma clutching her stuffed rabbit like a lifeline, Jake staring out the window at the normal, time-bound world beyond their cursed home. In 13 years, Emma would be 25, Jake would be 30, and they would all be gathered here again, waiting for 3:33 a.m. to arrive and steal another piece of their lives. The house had marked them now, claimed them as its witnesses, and deep in her heart, Sarah knew that no matter how far they ran, how many times they moved, on October 13th, 13 years from now, they would find themselves back in this living room, watching their clocks freeze at 3:33 a.m., listening for whispers in empty rooms, and waiting for time to remember how to flow again. The house was patient. It had all the time in the world. On a cold November evening in 1998, the Henderson family returned home from their anniversary dinner to find their front door standing wide open. Inside, their 2 children slept peacefully in their beds, completely unharmed. But their 17-year-old babysitter Sarah Mitchell, had vanished without a trace. No signs of struggle, no screams heard by neighbors. Just an empty house and a mystery that would haunt investigators for decades. What happened in those few hours between goodnight and goodbye? And why did the Hendersons receive a phone call from Sarah's number 3 days after she disappeared, when her phone had already been found in their living room? Sarah Mitchell was what every parent considered the ideal babysitter. A straight-A student at Riverside High School, she was captain of the debate team, volunteered at the local animal shelter, and had been babysitting for families in her Oregon neighborhood since she was 15. The Hendersons had used her services at least a dozen times over the past year, and their children, 6-year-old Emma and 4-year-old Lucas, absolutely adored her. She was reliable, punctual, and always left the house cleaner than she found it. On the evening of November 14th, 1998, Mrs. Henderson had called Sarah that afternoon to see if she could watch the kids while she and her husband celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary at a restaurant downtown. Sarah agreed immediately, arriving at 6:30 with her backpack full of homework and a VHS tape of The Lion King for the children. Mrs. Henderson would later tell police that Sarah seemed completely normal that evening, happy, energetic, and excited to spend time with the kids. There was absolutely nothing that suggested what was about to unfold. According to the timeline investigators pieced together, Sarah followed her usual routine that evening. She fed the children dinner, leftover spaghetti that Mrs. Henderson had prepared earlier, then let them play for an hour before bath time. Neighbors reported seeing the lights on in the upstairs bathroom around 7:45, consistent with the children's normal bedtime routine. By 8:15, both Emma and Lucas were tucked into their beds, and Sarah had settled onto the living room couch to work on her chemistry homework. She had called her mother at 8:30 to check in, a call that lasted less than 3 minutes. Sarah's mother, Patricia Mitchell, told police that her daughter sounded fine, perhaps a little tired, but nothing unusual. She said the kids were asleep and she was going to finish her homework and watch some TV, Patricia recalled through tears. She said she'd be home by 11:30 when the Hendersons got back. That was the last time I ever heard my daughter's voice. The Hendersons left the restaurant at approximately 10:15 and arrived home at 10:40. What they found would change their lives forever. When Robert Henderson pulled into his driveway, he immediately noticed something wrong. The front door was standing completely open, and he could see straight through to the hallway. His first thought was that someone had broken in. He told his wife to stay in the car while he cautiously approached the house, calling out Sarah's name. There was no answer. The living room was in disarray, not violently disturbed, but noticeably unusual. Sarah's chemistry textbook lay open on the coffee table, but her notebook was on the floor several feet away. A glass of water had been knocked over, leaving a dark stain on the carpet. The television was still on, but muted, playing static after the VHS tape had ended. Most unsettling of all, Sarah's shoes, a pair of white sneakers, were placed neatly by the door, as if she'd intentionally removed them before leaving. But her backpack, her jacket, and her house keys were still inside. Robert rushed upstairs to check on his children, his heart pounding. Both Emma and Lucas were sleeping soundly, undisturbed, with no awareness that anything was wrong. Sarah's cell phone, a bulky Nokia that her parents had given her for emergencies, was found on the kitchen counter, fully charged, with no recent calls or messages. It was as if Sarah Mitchell had simply evaporated into the night. Police arrived within 15 minutes of Robert's frantic 911 call and immediately launched a missing persons investigation. Officers searched the house and surrounding neighborhood throughout the night, using flashlights to comb through yards, parks, and nearby woods. They found nothing, no footprints, no signs of struggle, no witnesses who had seen or heard anything unusual. The interviews that followed revealed increasingly disturbing details. Emma Henderson despite being only 6 years old, provided a statement that chilled investigators. She told them she had woken up sometime after being put to bed and heard Sarah talking to someone downstairs. When police asked if she heard another voice, Emma said no. Sarah seemed to be talking on the phone, but her voice sounded scared and quiet. Emma had drifted back to sleep without going downstairs. A neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who lived 3 houses down, reported seeing a dark-colored sedan driving slowly past the Henderson home around 9:30, but she couldn't identify the make or model, and the license plate wasn't visible. Another neighbor heard a car door slam around 9:45, but thought nothing of it at the time. Perhaps most disturbing was the statement from Sarah's best friend, Jennifer Kozlowski. Jennifer told detectives that Sarah had mentioned feeling like someone had been following her for the past 2 weeks. She said she kept seeing the same car near the school and near her house, Jennifer explained. I asked her if she told her parents, and she said she didn't want to worry them because she wasn't completely sure. Sarah had never reported these concerns to police. 3 days after Sarah's disappearance, on November 17th, the Henderson family received a phone call that would become one of the most haunting elements of the case. It was approximately 2:15 in the afternoon when their home phone rang. Mrs. Henderson answered, expecting a call from one of the many detectives working the case. Instead, there was silence on the other end, not complete silence, but the sound of shallow breathing and faint static. "Hello?" Mrs. Henderson said repeatedly. "Who is this?" Then, after nearly 30 seconds of this disturbing quiet, a voice whispered something that Mrs. Henderson couldn't quite make out. She described it as distorted, like someone talking through water or from very far away. The voice said what sounded like, "I'm sorry," or possibly, "I'm still here," but Mrs. Henderson couldn't be certain. The call lasted 42 seconds before the line went dead. When police traced the call, they were stunned to discover it had been made from Sarah Mitchell's cell phone, the same phone that was sitting in an evidence locker at the police station, powered off and sealed in a bag. The phone's call log showed no record of any outgoing calls after 8:30 on the night of Sarah's disappearance. Technicians examined the phone thoroughly and found no signs of tampering or malfunction. They had no explanation for how a call could have originated from a phone that was turned off and locked in police custody. The Hendersons were convinced they had heard Sarah's voice. Patricia Mitchell, Sarah's mother, was brought in to listen to a recording of the call. She broke down, insisting it was her daughter, but the audio quality made definitive identification impossible. In the months and years that followed, investigators pursued numerous theories, but each one ultimately led nowhere. The initial focus was on someone Sarah knew, a classmate, a rejected romantic interest, or someone from her church youth group. Every person in Sarah's life was interviewed, and several underwent polygraph examinations. All were cleared. Detectives investigated whether Sarah had run away voluntarily, perhaps to escape some unknown pressure or secret life, but this theory was quickly abandoned. Sarah had $700 in savings in her bank account that was never touched. She had left behind all her possessions, including items of deep sentimental value, a necklace from her grandmother, who had recently passed away, her diary, and a college acceptance letter from the University of Oregon that had arrived just days before her disappearance. The possibility of abduction by a stranger was the most likely scenario, but without witnesses, physical evidence, or a crime scene, there was nothing concrete to investigate. The dark sedan seen in the neighborhood was never identified. Some investigators theorized that Sarah had been lured outside by someone she trusted, possibly the same person she had mentioned to her friend Jennifer. But why would she remove her shoes? Why would she leave without her phone or jacket on a cold November night? And how did someone enter and leave without the children waking up or neighbors seeing anything? The case went cold within 6 months, though it was never officially closed. Sarah Mitchell's face appeared on missing persons databases, television programs, and eventually internet forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries. Tips came in sporadically over the years, alleged sightings in different states, conspiracy theories about trafficking rings, even claims from psychics offering to communicate with Sarah's spirit. None led anywhere credible. 27 years have passed since Sarah Mitchell walked into the Henderson home and never walked out. Despite thousands of hours of investigation, multiple task forces, advances in forensic technology, and the public's enduring fascination with her case, not a single trace of Sarah has ever been found. No body, no clothing, no evidence of where she went or what happened to her after 9:30 that November evening. The case remains one of the most baffling disappearances in Oregon history. The Henderson family eventually moved away, unable to live in the house where their lives had intersected so tragically with Sarah's fate. They divorced 3 years later, the strain of guilt and unanswered questions too much for their marriage to bear. Emma and Lucas, now adults themselves, have given occasional interviews about that night, though neither remembers anything beyond what Emma told police as a child. Patricia Mitchell never stopped searching for her daughter. She maintained Sarah's bedroom exactly as it was, attended every conference on missing persons, and worked with lawmakers to improve Amber Alert systems and missing persons databases. She passed away in 2019, having spent 21 years without answers, without closure, without ever knowing what happened to her daughter. The mystery of Sarah Mitchell's disappearance endures because it violates every instinct we have about how the world should work. Teenage girls don't simply vanish from locked houses with children sleeping upstairs. They don't leave behind their shoes, their phones, their entire lives without a single clue. The front door standing open that night was perhaps the most honest thing about the case, an invitation into a mystery that remains unsolved, a threshold between the known and the unknowable. Sarah Mitchell walked through that door, or was taken through it, and she never came back. Somewhere, somehow, someone knows what happened. But 27 years of silence suggest that the truth disappeared with her that cold November night, leaving nothing behind but questions, grief, and the haunting image of an empty house with its door wide open to the darkness. They say some doors should never be opened. In the forgotten town of Ashford Hollow, there stands a church that has been abandoned for 70 years. No services, no prayers, no life. But the locals whisper of something else, something that happens when the clock strikes 12. They say that at midnight, the doors open on their own. They say the dead come to worship. And they say that anyone foolish enough to witness it never leaves. Tonight, someone is about to discover if the legends are true. Marcus Webb didn't believe in ghosts. As an investigative journalist for a dying newspaper, he believed in facts, evidence, and the desperate need for a story that would save his career. The rumors about St. Lazarus Church had been circulating for decades. Tales of phantom bells, spectral hymns, and a congregation that gathered in the dead of night. Local historians claimed the church had been sealed after a mysterious tragedy in 1953, when the entire congregation vanished during a midnight mass. No bodies were ever found. No explanation was ever given. Marcus had spent 3 weeks researching, interviewing terrified locals who refused to go near the church after dark, collecting fragments of folklore that all pointed to the same conclusion. Something unholy happened at St. Lazarus, and it was still happening. His editor had laughed at the pitch, calling it small-town superstition, but Marcus saw opportunity. One night, one investigation, one story that would put him back on the map. He arrived at the church at 11:30, his camera equipment heavy on his shoulder, a flashlight in his hand, and skepticism armoring his mind. The building loomed before him, a massive stone structure choked with ivy, its bell tower reaching toward the stars like an accusing finger. The air felt wrong here, too still, too cold for an October night. But Marcus pushed forward. He had a story to write. The door was unlocked. That should have been his first warning. Marcus pushed it open, and the hinges screamed in protest, echoing through the cavernous interior. His flashlight beam swept across the sanctuary, revealing rows of wooden pews covered in dust, a pulpit draped in cobwebs, and walls lined with faded portraits of stern-faced clergy. The air inside was thick and stale, carrying the scent of decay and something else, something sweet and sickly, like flowers left too long on a grave. He set up his camera on a tripod facing the altar, adjusted the night vision settings, and checked his watch. 11:47, 13 minutes until midnight. Marcus moved through the church, documenting everything. The cracked stained glass windows depicting biblical scenes of judgment and resurrection, the confessionals with their doors hanging open like broken jaws, the stone baptismal font filled with black water that didn't reflect his flashlight. Every journalist instinct told him this was just an abandoned building, a relic of a forgotten era. But something deeper, something primal, whispered that he should leave. He ignored it. At 11:55, he positioned himself in the shadows of the back pew, camera recording, notepad ready. The church settled around him with creaks and groans. And then, at exactly midnight, the temperature plummeted. His breath became visible in the air. The candles on the altar, unlit moments before, suddenly flickered to life with pale blue flames, and the door behind him slammed shut with a thunderous boom that shook dust from the rafters. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs as he heard them. Footsteps. Dozens of footsteps, but they weren't coming from the door. They were coming from below, from beneath the floorboards, from within the walls, from the very stones of the church itself. Figures began to materialize in the pews, not walking in, not opening doors, simply appearing one by one, filling the seats with impossible, silent efficiency. They looked almost human. Almost. Men in decaying suits from decades past. Women in moth-eaten dresses, their faces hidden behind funeral veils. Children in Sunday clothes that hung from their emaciated frames. All of them perfectly still, perfectly silent, facing the altar with an attention that felt hungry. Marcus pressed himself against the wall, his camera forgotten, his scientific skepticism shattered. This wasn't a hoax. This wasn't mass hallucination. These were the dead, and they had come to worship. A figure emerged from the shadows behind the pulpit, a priest in rotting vestments, his face pale as candle wax, his eyes black hollows that somehow still saw. When he spoke, his voice echoed not from his lips, but from everywhere at once, reverberating through Marcus's skull. "Brothers and sisters," the priest intoned, "we gather once more in the presence of the eternal dark. We who have crossed the threshold, we who have answered the call, we who serve the hunger beneath." The congregation responded in unison, their voices a chorus of whispers and moans. "We serve. We hunger. We endure." And then, as one, every head in the church turned to look directly at Marcus. Terror seized Marcus's limbs. He tried to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. The dead congregation rose as one, the sound of their movement like wind through a cemetery, rustling fabric, creaking joints, the whisper of dry skin. They didn't rush toward him. They simply waited, patient as only the dead can be, their hollow eyes filled with ancient expectation. "We have been waiting," the priest said, gliding down the aisle toward Marcus with movements that defied the laws of physics. "Every 7 years, the church calls. Every 7 years, a witness must come. Every 7 years, the congregation must grow." Marcus found his voice. broken and desperate. I'm not one of you. I'm alive. I'm leaving." He lunged for the door, throwing his weight against it, but it wouldn't budge. The wood had become ice cold, and his hands burned where they touched it. He pounded on it, screamed, but the sound died in the thick air of the church, absorbed by the walls as if the building itself were swallowing his voice. "The living always resist," the priest continued, now standing just behind him. Marcus could feel the cold radiating from the figure, could smell the grave dirt and rot. "But the church has chosen you. It brought you here tonight. It unlocked its door for you, and now you must fulfill your purpose." The congregation began to chant, a low rhythmic sound in a language Marcus didn't recognize but somehow understood in his bones. It was a summoning, a binding, a transformation. They were welcoming him home. Marcus felt something change inside him, the warmth draining from his extremities, the slowing of his heartbeat, the way the shadows seemed to reach for him with familiar affection. He staggered away from the door, clutching his chest, and saw his reflection in the black water of the baptismal font. His face was pale, too pale. His eyes were beginning to hollow. "No," he whispered, but even his voice sounded distant now, as if it belonged to someone else. "Please, no." The priest placed a skeletal hand on his shoulder. "Take your place, brother. The congregation needs you. The hunger needs you. And in time you will understand that this is mercy, to serve forever, to never truly die, to exist in the threshold between light and dark, feeding the ancient thing that dwells beneath this sacred ground." Marcus looked at the pews, at the waiting dead, at the empty seat that seemed to pulse with expectation. His mind screamed to resist, to fight, to somehow escape, but his body was already moving, drawn by a will that was no longer entirely his own. He took one step toward the congregation, then another. The priest smiled, revealing teeth like broken tombstones. "Welcome home." 3 days later, Marcus Webb's editor received a package. Inside was Marcus's camera, memory card intact. The footage showed everything: the arrival, the congregation, the priest, and Marcus's slow walk toward the pews. But the video cut out at 8 minutes and 43 seconds, the screen dissolving into static. After the static, there were 3 seconds of additional footage. Marcus, sitting in the front pew, head bowed in prayer, surrounded by the dead. His eyes were closed, his lips were moving, but whether he was still alive, still conscious, still himself, the camera couldn't tell. The church door remains locked. Local police tried to investigate after Marcus's disappearance, but the doors wouldn't open, not even with crowbars and battering rams. The windows are too high and too narrow to enter. The building seems sealed, as if by some force beyond human understanding. But the locals know better than to press the issue. They know what happens at midnight. They know the congregation still gathers. And sometimes, when the wind is right and the night is dark, they swear they can hear a new voice joining the phantom hymns, a voice that sounds terribly, heartbreakingly human. The church waits, the congregation endures, and in 7 years, the doors will unlock again. Picture this: a Tuesday afternoon in suburban Ohio, bright sunshine, families shopping, nothing unusual. A delivery van pulls up to Miller's Corner store at 2:47 p.m. The driver steps out, walks inside, and then vanishes. Not in the dead of night, not during a storm, in the middle of the day, in front of dozens of potential witnesses. By 6 p.m., the van is gone too. No footage, no witnesses, no explanation. This is the story of one of the most baffling disappearances in recent memory, a case that defies logic and continues to haunt investigators to this day. September 14th, 2018, began like any other day in Riverside, Ohio. Miller's Corner store, a family-owned convenience shop that had served the community for over 30 years, was experiencing its typical Tuesday afternoon traffic. Owner Margaret Miller was behind the counter. Her daughter Sarah was restocking shelves, and roughly 8 to 10 customers browsed the aisles. The weather was clear, temperature hovering around 72 degrees, perfect fall weather. Security cameras inside the store were operational, recording everything as they always did. Outside, the parking lot held about 6 vehicles, nothing out of the ordinary. At exactly 2:47 p.m., according to the store's timestamp, a white Ford Transit delivery van pulled into the parking lot. It bore no company markings, no logos, just a plain white exterior that could belong to any small business or independent contractor. What happened next would transform this unremarkable Tuesday into one of the strangest cases the Riverside Police Department had ever encountered. The driver who emerged from the van appeared entirely ordinary. Security footage shows a Caucasian male, approximately 30 to 40 years old, wearing a gray uniform shirt and dark pants, standard delivery driver attire. He was of average height and build, with short, dark hair, carrying a small clipboard or tablet device. Nothing about his appearance raised any alarms. He walked with purpose toward the store entrance, pushed open the glass door at 2:49 p.m., and stepped inside. Margaret Miller would later tell police she briefly glanced at him, assumed he was making a delivery or perhaps looking for an address, and returned to helping a customer with lottery tickets. Sarah Miller, working in aisle 3, didn't recall seeing him at all. Other customers would provide similarly vague recollections. A man in work clothes, nothing memorable, just another face in the afternoon crowd. The security camera captured him entering, walking past the front counter and moving toward the back of the store where the restrooms and storage area were located. And then, in what seems impossible, he simply ceased to exist within that building. Here's where the story defies explanation. The delivery driver never emerged from Miller's corner store. Not through the front door, not through the back delivery entrance, not through any window or exit. Margaret Miller closed her register at 6:15 p.m., a normal end to her shift, completely unaware that anything unusual had occurred. It wasn't until she walked to her car and noticed the white van still parked in the same spot over 3 hours later that something felt wrong. The van sat empty, driver's door closed, no signs of activity. Margaret called out, thinking perhaps the driver had fallen ill in the restroom. Sarah checked the bathrooms and storage area. Nothing. They reviewed the day's events in their minds and realized with growing unease that they'd never seen the man leave. At 6:32 p.m., Margaret called the Riverside Police Department. Officers arrived at 6:48 p.m. to investigate what they assumed would be a simple matter, perhaps a medical emergency or a confused individual still somewhere in the building. What they found instead was the beginning of a mystery that would consume hundreds of investigation hours and yield absolutely no answers. Detective Robert Chen and his partner Detective Lisa Morales took lead on what initially seemed like a straightforward missing person case. Their first action was to review all security footage from inside the store. They watched the driver enter at 2:49 p.m., walking with apparent purpose toward the rear of the store. The camera angles showed him passing the beverage coolers, moving beyond the last aisle, and approaching the hallway that led to restrooms and the storage area. Then, maddeningly, he walked out of frame. The storage area had no camera. It was a blind spot in the coverage. But here's the critical detail. That hallway had only 3 possible routes. The restrooms, which were checked and empty. The storage room, which had no external exit and was thoroughly searched. And back into the main store, which would have required passing the camera again. The footage was reviewed frame by frame for the entire afternoon and evening. The driver never walked back past that camera. He never exited through the front door. Officers searched every inch of the building, ceiling tiles, floor panels, storage cabinets large enough to hide a person. They found nothing. No trace of the man, no disturbance, no signs of struggle, nothing out of place. While police searched the building, the white van remained in the parking lot, now under observation. Officers photographed it, documented its position, and prepared to process it as evidence. The van was locked, and they were arranging for proper authorization to open it when Detective Chen decided to check the store's external security cameras. Miller's Corner store had 2 exterior cameras, one covering the front entrance, one covering the side delivery area. Neither had a direct view of the parking lot where the van was positioned. This wasn't unusual. The cameras were installed primarily to monitor entry points, not vehicle activity. At 8:17 p.m., while officers were inside reviewing interior footage again, something impossible happened for the second time that day. A patrolman stationed outside radioed in with confusion in his voice. The van was gone. Not driven away. Gone. He'd been positioned near the front entrance, had looked away for perhaps 90 seconds to speak with a witness, and when he turned back, the empty parking space stared back at him. Detective Morales rushed outside, unable to believe what she was hearing. The parking lot was empty. The van had vanished just as inexplicably as its driver. Traffic cameras at nearby intersections were immediately reviewed. Nothing. The van never appeared on any road leading away from the area. It was as if it had simply dematerialized. The investigation into the van itself revealed more questions than answers. Using the partial license plate captured in the store's footage during the brief moment the van was visible pulling into the lot, police traced the registration. The plates belonged to a 2015 Ford Transit reported stolen 3 weeks earlier from a rental facility in Columbus, Ohio, approximately 90 miles away. The rental company confirmed the theft, but had no leads on who took it. More disturbing, the company's GPS tracking system, which should have been active on the vehicle, had been professionally disabled. This wasn't a simple wire-cutting job. Someone with technical knowledge had thoroughly removed the tracking capability. Forensic analysis of the store's exterior footage, enhanced and magnified, revealed that the van's VIN had been obscured, the company rental markings had been removed, and even the make and model badges had been taken off. This was a vehicle someone had deliberately made anonymous and untraceable. The rental company provided records showing the van had been rented only twice since purchase, both times to verifiable customers with no connection to Riverside or any criminal activity. The theft report had generated no leads until now. But why steal a delivery van, drive it 90 miles, park it at a random convenience store, and then abandon both the vehicle and a carefully planned disappearance? Detective Chen and his team interviewed every person who had been in or near Miller's Corner store that afternoon. The accounts were frustratingly consistent in their vagueness. Margaret Miller remembered a normal-looking delivery guy, but couldn't describe his face in detail. Sarah Miller never saw him clearly at all. Customer Patricia Owens recalled seeing someone in work clothes but thought he might have been wearing blue, not gray. Another customer, James Richardson, was certain the man had been carrying a package, which contradicted the footage showing only a clipboard. A teenager in the parking lot remembered the white van, but insisted it had some kind of logo on the side, yet the footage clearly showed it was unmarked. These inconsistent details plagued the investigation. Forensic psychologists explained that eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, especially for mundane events people have no reason to scrutinize. The man had looked so ordinary, so expected, that he'd essentially been invisible. No one had studied his face. No one had found him remarkable enough to remember. Police brought in a sketch artist, but the resulting composite was so generic it could match thousands of people. Brown hair, average features, no distinctive characteristics. He was the human equivalent of the unmarked van, deliberately forgettable. As weeks turned into months, Investigators and amateur sleuths developed numerous theories to explain the impossible disappearance. Theory 1. The driver had an accomplice inside the store, perhaps an employee or customer who helped him hide, then escape. But how? The store was thoroughly searched, and all employees and customers were accounted for and interviewed. Theory 2. There was a hidden passage or exit in the storage area that investigators missed. Multiple searches with ground-penetrating radar and structural experts found no hidden spaces, no forgotten tunnels, no concealed doors. The building's blueprints matched its physical reality exactly. Theory 3. The driver never actually intended to disappear. He suffered a medical emergency, became disoriented, and somehow left through a route that cameras missed, and the van was stolen separately by someone else. But the timing was too coincidental, and there were no other exits that cameras didn't cover. Theory 4. The most unsettling. The entire event was a carefully planned distraction or test. Perhaps the driver and van were part of some intelligence operation, criminal organization testing surveillance gaps, or even a psychological experiment. But to what end? Nothing was stolen from the store. No crime was committed beyond the van theft weeks earlier. It seemed like an enormous effort for absolutely no apparent payoff. By early 2019, the case had grown cold. Despite hundreds of investigation hours, interviews with over 60 witnesses, reviews of traffic cameras within a 10-mile radius, and appeals to the public for information, the Riverside Police Department had no answers. The driver was never identified. The van was never recovered. No one came forward claiming to know anything about the incident. The case remained officially open, but no longer received active investigation. Detective Chen, who retired in 2021, admitted in a later interview that the Miller's Corner store disappearance haunted him more than any other case in his 30-year career. "Everything about it seems impossible," he said, "but it happened. In broad daylight, on camera, with witnesses, and we have absolutely nothing." The store itself changed hands in 2020 when Margaret Miller decided to sell after 42 years of ownership. The new owners installed additional cameras covering every angle, including the parking lot, a direct response to the unsolved mystery. Local residents still discuss the case, and it's become something of an urban legend in Riverside. But legends have explanations, even if they're exaggerated or false. This case has none. Just a man who walked into a building and never walked out. Just a van that disappeared in 90 seconds. Just questions that may never have answers. The case of the vanishing delivery driver remains one of the most perplexing unsolved mysteries in recent Ohio history. No body has ever been found. No missing person reports match the description from that day. No white Ford Transit matching the stolen vehicle has ever been recovered. The driver, whoever he was, stepped into Miller's Corner store on September 14, 2018, and ceased to exist in any traceable way. Sometimes the most frightening mysteries aren't the ones involving obvious violence or clear criminal intent. Sometimes they're the ones that simply make no sense at all, that violate our understanding of how reality should work. Somewhere, perhaps, there's an explanation. Maybe the driver is living under a new identity, having successfully executed the perfect disappearance. Maybe there's a detail investigators missed, a piece of evidence that would unlock the entire puzzle. Or maybe some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Maybe some questions are destined to remain unanswered, lingering in the space between what we know is possible and what we witnessed actually happen. The parking space outside what used to be Miller's Corner store sits empty most days now, but sometimes, local residents say, they still pause when they pass by, half expecting to see a white van parked there and a man in gray walking toward a door he'll never walk back through. There are places in every hospital that nurses whisper about. Corridors where the lights flicker for no reason. Rooms where patients recover too quickly, or not at all. But room 6 was different. Room 6 was where Sarah Mitchell would discover that some doors should never be opened and some patients should never be healed. What she thought was her duty would become her nightmare. And the worst part, she had been caring for a ghost for 3 weeks without knowing it. Sarah Mitchell had been a night shift nurse for 5 years at St. Mercy Hospital, and she thought she'd seen everything. The screams of withdrawal patients, the silent tears of the terminally ill, the moment when someone takes their last breath while holding your hand. But nothing prepared her for room 6. The assignment came on a Tuesday night. October 13th, to be exact. Head nurse Patterson handed her the chart without making eye contact, which should have been the first warning sign. "Room 6 needs monitoring tonight," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The patient is difficult." Sarah took the chart and noticed something odd immediately. The paper felt wrong, too thick, too old, like parchment that had been handled by countless hands over decades. The patient's name was listed as E. Holloway, but there were no admission dates, no insurance information, no emergency contacts. Just a diagnosis written in faded ink. Acute dissociative disorder with parasitic delusions. Room 6 was at the end of the east wing, past the supply closet and the maintenance room that always smelled like chemicals and rust. Sarah had walked this hallway 1,000 times, but tonight it felt longer, colder. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and twice they flickered completely out, leaving her in darkness for 3, maybe 4 seconds. Long enough to feel her heart rate spike, long enough to hear something. Footsteps, echoing from somewhere she couldn't identify. When she finally reached room 6, she noticed the door was slightly ajar, which violated protocol. She knocked gently. "Hello? Mr. Holloway? I'm Sarah, your nurse for tonight." No response. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was freezing, her breath visible in small clouds. The patient lay in the bed, facing the window, completely still. "Mr. Holloway?" she tried again, approaching slowly. When the figure finally turned toward her, Sarah felt her stomach tighten. The man was ancient, far older than any age listed on a medical chart. His skin was translucent, like wax paper, stretched too tight over prominent bones. But his eyes were young, bright, alert, hungry. "You're new," he whispered, his voice dry as autumn leaves. The last one lasted 3 weeks before she understood. "How long will you last, Sarah Mitchell?" Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah fell into a routine with room 6. Every night shift, she would check his vitals, administer medication, change his bedding. But strange things kept happening, things she rationalized at first, then tried to ignore, and finally couldn't deny. The medical chart changed. Not just updated, changed completely. One night, she'd read notes about cardiac arrhythmia. The next night, those same pages discussed tuberculosis treatment from 1952. Some entries were written in what looked like fountain pen ink. Others were typed on old typewriters, the letters slightly misaligned. And then there were the pages written in something dark red, almost brown, something that couldn't possibly be ink, but that she refused to acknowledge as anything else. The patient himself was a paradox. Some nights he seemed confused, asking for nurses who had retired decades ago. Other nights he was sharp, too sharp, discussing Sarah's childhood in detail she'd never shared. "Your mother's maiden name was Reeves," he said one night. "She died when you were 12. Car accident on Highway 40. You blame yourself because you asked her to pick you up early from school that day." Sarah's blood ran cold. "How do you know that?" But E. Holloway just smiled, a terrible smile that revealed teeth too white. too perfect for someone his age. Room 6 knows everything, dear. The walls remember. The floor absorbs. We've been collecting stories for so very long. The breaking point came on her 15th night with E. Holloway. Sarah arrived for her shift to find the entire East Wing unusually quiet. Too quiet. Even the usual sounds, ventilation systems, distant conversations, rolling gurneys, were absent. She walked to room 6 and found the door wide open. The patient was sitting upright in bed, staring directly at the doorway as if he'd been waiting for her. "Tonight, you learn the truth," he said. As Sarah approached, she noticed something horrifying. The walls of room 6 were covered in writing, handwritten notes, dates, names, all scratched directly into the paint and plaster beneath. She recognized some of the handwriting from the medical charts. But these weren't medical notes. These were confessions. Pleas, warnings. "Help me, I can't leave. Room 6 won't let me go. I died here in 1987, but I'm still working my shifts." And then she saw her own handwriting. "My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I have been dead for 3 weeks." Her hands were shaking as she backed toward the door. No, that's not possible. "I'm alive. I'm here. Are you?" E. Holloway's voice was soft, almost pitying. "Do you remember driving to work tonight? Really remember? Or does it feel like you simply appeared in the parking lot, like you've done every night since October 13th? Sarah tried to recall. The memory was there, wasn't it? But when she reached for details, they slipped away like water through her fingers. Sarah ran from room 6 down the hallway toward the nurse's station. But something was wrong. The hospital looked different, darker, more decayed. Paint peeled from walls she remembered being freshly repainted last month. Equipment she'd used yesterday was now rusted and broken. When she reached the nurse's station, she found it empty. Not just unstaffed, abandoned. Dust covered every surface. Cobwebs stretched between the desk and the computer monitors, which were ancient models she hadn't seen since nursing school. On the desk, she found a newspaper. The date read October 13th, but the year was 1998, 27 years ago. With trembling hands, she opened the employee files and found her own folder. Inside was a death certificate. Sarah Mitchell, age 27, died October 13th, 1998, in a car accident on her way to work at St. Mercy Hospital. Vehicle collision at the intersection of Mercy Drive and Highway 40, the same location where her mother died 15 years earlier. Below, it was a hospital incident report. Following the closure of St. Mercy's East Wing in 1987 due to structural instability and reported paranormal activity, Room 6 has been permanently sealed. Several staff members reported treating a patient named E. Holloway in the months before the closure, but no admission records exist for this individual. All nurses who reported contact with Room 6 experienced severe psychological episodes. 3 are deceased, circumstances unclear. The room remains locked and is not to be accessed under any circumstances. Sarah found herself back in room 6, though she couldn't remember walking there. E. Holloway was gone. The bed was empty, stripped down to a bare, rotted mattress. But on the wall, written in fresh blood, or ink that looked exactly like it, was a new message. "Welcome home, Nurse Mitchell. Your shift begins now." She heard footsteps in the hallway, a voice calling, "Room 6 needs monitoring tonight." Through the doorway, she saw a young nurse approaching, clipboard in hand, wearing modern scrubs with a hospital ID that read 2025. The nurse knocked on the door. "Hello? Is anyone in here?" Sarah tried to speak, to warn her, to scream. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was, "Come in, dear. I've been waiting for you." The nurse entered, and Sarah watched from the bed as her own hands, transparent now, barely visible, reached for the medical chart that appeared on the bedside table. The chart was written in her handwriting, in dark red ink, and the patient's name was the one belonging to the nurse who had just walked in. Sarah finally understood. Room 6 didn't have a patient. Room 6 was the patient, and she was no longer a nurse. She was part of the disease. But here's what Sarah didn't know, what the audience won't know. In the modern hospital, in the very same location, a nurse named Jennifer just finished her shift in what is now called Room 206. She treated a difficult patient tonight, an elderly man who knew too much about her personal life. As she drives home, she passes the intersection of Mercy Drive and Highway 40 and feels an inexplicable chill. Tomorrow she won't remember arriving at work. She'll just be there, like she always has been. And in the basement of St. Mercy Hospital, behind a wall that was sealed in 1987, something whispers, "Next shift in 3, 2, 1. 17 smartphones, all waterlogged, all recovered from the same isolated lake, and every single one belonged to someone who vanished without a trace. What started as a routine diving exercise in the summer of 2019 would uncover one of the most disturbing mysteries in modern criminal history, a mystery that would reveal deleted messages, desperate final communications, and a pattern so chilling that investigators still lose sleep over it today. This is the story of Blackwater Lake and the ghosts that still haunt its depths. Blackwater Lake sits in the remote corners of northern Oregon, 3 hours from any major city. It's the kind of place where cell service is non-existent, and the nearest town consists of a gas station and a diner that closes at 6. For decades, it was a spot known only to local fishermen and the occasional hiker willing to trek 8 miles into the wilderness. On July 12, 2019, the Clackamas County Sheriff's Department was conducting a training exercise for their newly formed dive recovery team. They weren't looking for anything in particular, just practicing in the frigid, dark waters that plunged to depths of over 200 feet in places. Deputy Mark Holloway was 20 feet below the surface when his flashlight caught something rectangular lodged between 2 rocks. He assumed it was trash, but when he pulled it free, he recognized it immediately as a smartphone, intact inside a waterproof case. Standard procedure required him to bag it as potential evidence. Within 3 hours of systematic searching, the team had recovered 4 more phones, all in waterproof cases, all within a 100-foot radius. By the end of that week, they had pulled 17 devices from the lake bottom. The forensic team at the Oregon State Crime Lab faced an unprecedented challenge. Water damage had destroyed most of the phones beyond recognition, but the waterproof cases had protected them enough that data recovery might be possible. It took 6 months of painstaking work, but eventually, they were able to extract information from 11 of the 17 devices. What they found was staggering. Each phone belonged to a different missing person. Cases spanning 7 years, from 2012 to 2019. The victims had seemingly nothing in common. Different ages, different genders, different backgrounds. A 23-year-old graduate student from Seattle, a 47-year-old contractor from Boise, a 31-year-old nurse from Portland, a 19-year-old college dropout from Spokane. None of them had any known connection to Blackwater Lake. Most had gone missing hundreds of miles away from this remote location. Their cases were scattered across 4 states, handled by different departments, never linked because there was no obvious pattern. No bodies had ever been found. Until now, there was no crime scene. But the phones told a different story. Someone had brought them here. Someone had thrown them into the depths, probably believing they'd never be found. The recovered text messages painted a timeline of terror that still haunts the investigators who read them. From the phone of Sarah Chen, missing since March 2016, a message to her sister sent at 11:47 p.m. "Someone's following me. Same car from the grocery store. I'm scared." That was her last communication. Her car was found abandoned on a rural highway 3 days later. No sign of struggle, no Sarah. From Marcus Webb's device, disappeared August 2018. Multiple unanswered texts to his girlfriend. Then at 2:13 a.m., a message he started typing but never sent. The draft simply read, "He said he knows where you..." and nothing more. From Rachel Kincaid's phone, last seen June 2017. A voice memo, recorded but never sent. In the 47-second audio file, you can hear her breathing heavily, walking fast. Then a man's voice in the distance, calm and friendly. "Hey, need some help?" Rachel's whispered response, "No, I'm fine." Then the sound of footsteps approaching faster. The recording cuts off. The most disturbing element wasn't the messages themselves. It was what forensic analysts discovered when they examined the metadata. In the hours before each victim disappeared, their phones had pinged off the same cell tower. A tower serving a remote stretch of Highway 26, 40 miles from Blackwater Lake. The same location. Every single time. Someone had a hunting ground. As investigators dug deeper, a terrifying profile began to emerge. The victims were all traveling alone when they vanished. Most disappeared during evening hours or late at night. Several had stopped for gas or food in small towns along Highway 26 before their phones went dark. Surveillance footage from various gas stations showed potential sightings, but the quality was too poor for identification. What chilled investigators most was the methodology. This wasn't random. The waterproof cases suggested premeditation. The killer had protected the phones deliberately before disposing of them, perhaps as trophies or simply as a precaution. The remote location of Blackwater Lake indicated intimate knowledge of the area, and the 7-year span suggested someone who had perfected their technique over time. Behavioral analysts from the FBI were brought in. Their assessment was grim. They were likely dealing with an organized serial predator who selected victims of opportunity along a corridor they controlled. The phone disposal was a ritual, a way of maintaining power over the victims even after their deaths. The lake was thoroughly searched for remains, cadaver dogs, sonar equipment, systematic grid dives. They found nothing but the phones. The depth and cold temperature of the lake would preserve bodies, but wherever the actual remains were, they weren't in Blackwater Lake. The phones were just markers, souvenirs deposited in a place the killer considered safe. The investigation became one of the largest multi-state task forces in Pacific Northwest history. Over 200 law enforcement personnel, countless interviews, thousands of hours of surveillance footage reviewed. They compiled lists of suspects, long-haul truckers who regularly traveled Highway 26, registered sex offenders in the region, anyone with property near Blackwater Lake. Dozens of persons of interest were questioned. Some looked promising at first, but every lead eventually crumbled. Alibis checked out. DNA didn't match. Evidence didn't connect. The most promising suspect was a man named Dale Richter, a former park ranger who owned land 12 miles from the lake and had no alibi for 3 of the disappearances. But forensic examination of his property, vehicles, and digital footprint yielded nothing. No physical evidence, no connection to any victim. His phone records placed him far from the cell tower during critical time frames. After 8 months of intensive investigation, he was cleared. The task force expanded their search, looking for additional victims whose cases might fit the pattern. They found 6 more missing persons who vanished along the same corridor. But without their phones, without remains, there was no way to definitively connect them to Blackwater Lake. By late 2021, the investigation had stalled. No new evidence emerged. No witnesses came forward with information that led anywhere conclusive. Today, Blackwater Lake remains as remote and silent as ever. The case is officially open but effectively cold. The 17 phones sit in evidence storage, silent witnesses to horrors that may never be fully understood. The questions that keep investigators awake are endless. Who was this person who moved through the Pacific Northwest like a phantom for at least 7 years? Are they still out there, having simply moved to a different hunting ground? Did they stop, or were the phones just never found in their new dumping location? Why keep the phones at all? Why dispose of them so carefully in one location but leave the bodies somewhere else entirely? Was Blackwater Lake significant to the killer or just convenient? And perhaps most disturbing, how many more victims are there? The 17 phones represent only the ones that were found in one specific location during one training exercise. How many others are lying at the bottom of different lakes, buried in different forests, lost in places where no one will ever think to look? Families of the victims have formed a support network, united by tragedy and the absence of closure. They hold vigils every year at Blackwater Lake, leaving flowers at the shore. They hope that someday someone will come forward with information, that someday the person responsible will make a mistake. But as years pass and leads evaporate, hope becomes harder to hold on to. 17 phones, 17 lives interrupted, 17 families still waiting for answers. The investigation remains open. The FBI maintains a tip line. Forensic technology improves every year, offering new hope that the evidence might finally reveal its secrets. But for now, Blackwater Lake keeps its mysteries. The killer, whoever they are, remains unknown, unnamed, and unpunished. And somewhere out there, they might still be watching the same lonely highways where they once hunted. If you have any information about the Blackwater Lake case or the disappearances along Highway 26 between 2012 and 2019, please contact the Clackamas County Sheriff's Department or the FBI's Pacific Northwest Regional Office, because 17 voices were silenced and they deserve to be heard. What if I told you that somewhere in your house, there's a door you've never noticed? A door that doesn't exist during the day. A door that only appears when the clock strikes midnight. And what if I told you that behind that door lies something impossible, something that knows your name? Tonight, I'm going to tell you the story of Marcus Webb, a man who found that door, a man who made the mistake of opening it, and a man who was never seen again. Marcus Webb had lived in his 2-story colonial house for 7 years. He knew every creak in the floorboards, every crack in the ceiling, every shadow that the streetlights cast through his windows, or so he thought. It started 3 weeks after his divorce was finalized. He'd been having trouble sleeping, the kind where you lie awake counting the hours until dawn, your mind replaying every mistake, every word you wish you'd said differently. On one of those sleepless nights, he'd gone downstairs for water. That's when he saw it. The grandfather clock in his hallway chimed midnight, and as the last echo faded, something changed. Between his living room and kitchen, where there had always been just a blank wall with a painting of boats, there was now a door. Not an old door that had always been there, not a door he'd somehow forgotten about. A door that absolutely, definitely had not existed 30 seconds earlier. It was black wood, ancient looking, with a brass handle that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Marcus stood frozen, glass of water trembling in his hand. He rubbed his eyes, looked away, looked back. The door remained. He approached it slowly, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. When he reached out to touch it, the wood was ice cold and seemed to pulse under his fingertips like something alive. He didn't open it that first night. He couldn't. Fear rooted him to the spot until 12:01 a.m., when the door simply vanished, as if it had never been there at all. The painting of boats hung innocently on the wall once more. Marcus convinced himself it had been a hallucination, stress, exhaustion. Maybe he was having a breakdown. But the next night, at exactly midnight, the door appeared again, and the night after that, and the night after that. For a week, he just watched it appear and disappear, too terrified to do anything more. But curiosity is a persistent thing. It gnaws at you. It whispers. On the 8th night, Marcus's hand closed around the brass handle. It was cold enough to burn. He turned it slowly, and the door opened without a sound. What he saw on the other side made his legs buckle. It wasn't his kitchen. It wasn't anything that should exist. Beyond the threshold stretched a landscape that defied every law of physics he knew. The sky was purple and green, swirling like oil on water. Mountains hung upside down, their peaks pointing at him while their bases dissolved into clouds. Crystalline structures that looked like buildings but bent in impossible angles dotted the horizon. And everywhere, there was movement in the shadows, shapes that almost looked human but moved wrong, jerked and flowed like stop-motion animation. The air that drifted through the doorway smelled of copper and ozone and something else, something ancient and rotting. But worse than the impossible landscape were the voices. They started as whispers, so faint Marcus thought he'd imagined them. Then they grew louder. "Marcus," they called, in tones that sounded almost human but not quite, like someone doing an impression of human speech without quite understanding how it should sound. "Marcus Webb, we've been waiting. We knew you'd come. We knew you'd open the door." The voices came from everywhere and nowhere, overlapping, echoing, some high-pitched and childlike, others deep as thunder. Some spoke in English, others in languages he didn't recognize, syllables that hurt to hear, that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. "Step through, Marcus. Step through and see. Step through and become. Step through and understand everything. All your questions, Marcus. Every answer you've ever needed. She's here, Marcus. Your mother who died. Your father who left. The life you could have lived. Step through. Just step through." Marcus slammed the door shut, gasping, sweat pouring down his face despite the cold. But he could still hear them, muffled now but persistent, calling his name until 12:01, when the door vanished and blessed silence returned. Marcus tried to research it. He dove into forums about paranormal experiences, read about dimensional doors, parallel universes, fairy portals, spiritual gateways. Nothing quite matched. Most stories he found were obvious fiction or the ravings of unstable minds, but a few, a very few, described something similar. Doors that appeared at specific times, landscapes that couldn't exist, voices that knew your name. None of those stories had endings. The authors simply stopped posting. Marcus told himself he wouldn't open it again. He'd ignore it. He'd sell the house. But every night at midnight, there it was. And every night, the voices were louder, more insistent, more persuasive. They started saying things they shouldn't know. Details about his childhood. Secrets he'd never told anyone. The exact words his ex-wife had said during their last argument. The dream he'd had the night before. "We know you, Marcus. We've always known you. This door has been waiting for you specifically. You were born to open it. You were born to step through. Stop resisting. Stop fighting. You know you want to see. You know you need to understand." He stopped going to work. Stopped answering calls. He just waited each night for midnight, standing before the door, listening to the voices, watching the impossible landscape shift and change beyond the threshold. 3 weeks after he first saw the door, Marcus made his decision. He'd stopped sleeping, stopped eating. His reflection in the mirror showed a stranger, hollow-eyed, gaunt, desperate. The voices had become his only companions, and some part of him had started to believe them. Maybe they were right. Maybe there were answers beyond that door. Maybe this mundane, empty life wasn't all there was. His divorce, his loneliness, his failures. Maybe on the other side of that door was something better, something meaningful, something vast and important and true. At 11:55 p.m., Marcus stood before the wall, waiting. When midnight struck and the door materialized, he didn't hesitate. He gripped the brass handle and pulled it open. The landscape beyond had changed. It was darker now, more defined, as if it had been waiting for him to commit. The voices rose to a crescendo, hundreds of them, thousands, all calling his name in tones of triumph and hunger. Yes, Marcus. Yes. Step through now. Come to us. Come home. Come to where you've always belonged. Marcus took a breath, his last breath in this world, though he didn't know it then, and he stepped through. The door slammed shut behind him with a sound like thunder, and then silence. When Marcus's sister came to check on him 3 days later, she found the house empty. His car was in the driveway, his phone on the kitchen counter, his wallet, keys, and shoes by the front door. But Marcus was gone. The police investigation went nowhere. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of foul play, no body, no leads. Just another missing person case that would eventually go cold. But Marcus's sister noticed something odd during one of her visits to his house. At midnight, while she was packing up his belongings, she thought she heard something. A sound like whispers coming from the wall between the living room and kitchen. And for just a moment, just the briefest flicker, she could have sworn she saw the outline of a door in the wall, a shadow of something that wasn't quite there. She left quickly and never came back. The house eventually sold to a new family. Sometimes late at night they hear whispers. Sometimes they think they see their young son standing in the hallway at midnight, staring at the blank wall as if seeing something they can't. They've asked him about it, but he just smiles and says, "The door says it's not ready for me yet. It's still waiting for someone else, someone." So tonight, when you're lying in bed and the clock approaches midnight, pay attention to the walls of your room. Look carefully at the shadows. Listen for whispers that might be calling your name, because somewhere, in some house, in some city, in some country, the midnight door is appearing right now, and it's always, always looking for someone to step through. The question is, will it be you? Imagine clocking in for your night shift at a quiet gas station. The fluorescent lights hum overhead. The coffee machine gurgles in the corner. You're alone, but you're used to it. Now imagine this. You're the fourth person to take this shift in 3 weeks. The 3 before you, they never clocked out. They simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind their belongings, untouched money in the register, and gas pumps still running. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Harper's Gas and Go in Millbrook, Idaho, a case that haunts investigators to this day. On the night of September 3, 2019, 28-year-old Marcus Hayes began his shift at Harper's Gas and Go at 11 p.m. Marcus was a reliable employee, a former Marine who'd returned to his hometown after his service ended. He'd worked the night shift for 2 years without incident. His routine was predictable. Unlock the store, count the register, brew fresh coffee, and settle in for the quiet hours until 7 a.m. But Marcus never made it to 7 a.m. When the morning shift manager, Carol Dennison, arrived at 6:55, she found something deeply unsettling. The front door was unlocked. The lights were on. Pump number 3 was still running, dispensing gas onto the concrete in a spreading pool. The register was open, showing exactly $843, nothing missing. Marcus's jacket hung on the hook behind the counter. His half-eaten turkey sandwich sat on the break room table, next to a still warm cup of coffee. Marcus Hayes was gone. Carol immediately called the police. Within hours, Millbrook's small police department had cordoned off the station. They interviewed Carol, reviewed the employee logs, and checked Marcus's background. Nothing seemed amiss. He had no enemies, no debts, no reason to disappear. His truck was still in the parking lot, keys in the ignition. His phone was found on the counter, battery at 67%. The initial theory was simple. Marcus had stepped outside for a smoke break, even though he didn't smoke, and something had happened. An accident, a medical emergency. Perhaps he'd wandered into the woods behind the station, disoriented. Search parties combed the surrounding area for 3 days. They found nothing. Exactly 1 week later, on September 10th, the night shift position was filled by 23-year-old Jennifer Cole. Jennifer was a college student working part-time to pay for her tuition. Friends described her as cautious, especially after hearing about Marcus's disappearance. She'd told her roommate that the job made her nervous, but she needed the money. Jennifer clocked in at 11 p.m. At 11:47 p.m., she sent a text to her roommate. "Dead quiet here. Kinda creepy, but I'm okay." That was the last anyone heard from her. The morning manager found an eerily similar scene. The door was unlocked, lights blazing. This time, pump number 5 was running, gas flooding the pavement. The register held $912, completely untouched. Jennifer's purse was behind the counter, her car keys inside. Her vehicle sat in the employee parking area. Her phone was on the counter, open to a half-written text that simply read, "Why is there?" The message ended there. This time, the police response was immediate and intense. Detective Sarah Reeves, brought in from the state police, took over the investigation. The coincidence was too stark to ignore. 2 people, same shift, same location, vanishing exactly 1 week apart, both leaving behind identical scenes of interrupted routine. Detective Reeves ordered the security footage to be analyzed frame by frame. What they found was disturbing, but not in the way anyone expected. The cameras showed Jennifer working normally, restocking shelves, serving the occasional late-night customer, cleaning the coffee station. Then, at approximately 2:17 a.m., something strange happened. The timestamp continued running, but Jennifer simply froze. For exactly 4 seconds, she stood completely motionless in the center of the store, her hand suspended halfway to a shelf. Then the footage flickered, just once, and she was gone. The store was empty. No one had entered. No one had left. She had simply ceased to exist within the frame. Technical experts examined the footage for tampering. They found none. The footage was continuous, unedited, stored on a closed system with no external access. By now, Harper's Gas and Go had become infamous. National news outlets picked up the story. Internet sleuths proposed theories ranging from serial killers to interdimensional portals. The owner, Harold Harper, considered closing the station entirely, but Detective Reeves convinced him to keep it open, with one condition. On September 17th, 46-year-old David Ortega volunteered to work the night shift. David was a former police officer from Nevada, now working as a private security consultant. He wore a body camera, carried 2 phones, and had a police radio. Detective Reeves stationed patrol cars at both ends of the road. The entire station was under surveillance, with additional cameras installed to cover every blind spot. David clocked in at 11 p.m. For the first 3 hours, everything proceeded normally. He checked in with Detective Reeves every 30 minutes. At 2:03 a.m., David radioed in. "All clear, still quiet." At 2:11 a.m., He radioed again. "Detective, I'm seeing something. The air in here looks wrong, like there's static." Detective Reeves and her team rushed into the station within 90 seconds. They found the same scene that had become sickeningly familiar. Door unlocked, lights on, pump number 7 running, creating a dangerous fuel spill. Register untouched, displaying $1,026. David's body camera was on the counter, still recording, but showing only static from 2:11 a.m. onward. This time, however, there was something else. The additional cameras Detective Reeves had installed captured something the original security system had missed. At exactly 2:11 a.m., every camera in the station recorded the same anomaly simultaneously. A shadow. Not cast by any person or object, but a shadow that seemed to exist independently, moving across the floor, the walls, the ceiling. It wasn't black. Witnesses who reviewed the footage said it was more like the absence of light, a void that consumed everything it touched. The shadow moved toward David, who was visible on camera, frozen just as Jennifer had been. His mouth was open, mid-word. His hand was reaching for his radio. The shadow enveloped him, and in the single frame that followed, less than a 30th of a second, David Ortega was gone. Forensic analysis of the footage revealed something that made even seasoned investigators uncomfortable. In the frame where David disappeared, his shadow remained. For exactly 7 frames, less than a quarter of a second, David's shadow stood alone in the store, cast by a body that no longer existed. Then it too vanished. Detective Reeves worked the case for 8 months, developing and discarding dozens of theories. The most rational explanation was a coordinated abduction, perhaps a trafficking ring or cult targeting the gas station. But the logistics made no sense. How could perpetrators bypass multiple security systems, leave no forensic evidence, and execute 3 perfect kidnappings while being actively monitored? The FBI joined the investigation, bringing resources and expertise. They examined everything: electromagnetic anomalies, carbon monoxide levels, infrasound that might cause hallucinations, underground tunnels, secret rooms. They found nothing unusual. The building was exactly what it appeared to be: a simple gas station built in 1987 with no hidden spaces and no structural abnormalities. Psychological theories emerged. Perhaps the 3 had staged their own disappearances. But David Ortega had no reason to vanish. He'd been hired specifically to investigate, and the synchronized timing, the identical scenes, the security footage anomalies, these couldn't be explained by voluntary disappearance. Some investigators, speaking off the record, admitted to considering explanations that fell outside conventional police work: environmental hazards that caused instantaneous disorientation and wandering, rare atmospheric phenomena, even stranger possibilities that none would voice officially. The gas station was closed permanently in June 2020. Harold Harper sold the property to a development company who tore down the building in August of the same year. Detective Reeves retired in 2021, the case still officially open, still unsolved. But the story doesn't end with the demolition. In March 2023, nearly 4 years after Marcus Hayes vanished, a construction worker named Robert Finn was building a new shopping plaza on the site of the former gas station. While excavating for the foundation, his equipment struck something metallic 4 feet below where the old store counter had stood. It was a safe. An old commercial safe, the kind used by businesses in the 1980s and 90s. It wasn't on any blueprints. Harold Harper, when contacted, had no knowledge of it. According to property records, it predated his ownership. The land had been purchased from a previous owner in 1985. When authorities opened the safe, they found it contained 3 items: a ledger, a set of keys, and a handwritten letter. The ledger dated back to 1992. It listed names and dates. 37 names in total, spread across 15 years. The entries stopped in 2007 with a final note. It sleeps now. Do not wake it after dark. The keys were labeled with addresses, storage units across 3 states. Police opened 12 of them before the investigation was quietly classified. What they found has never been officially disclosed, though several officers involved in opening those units took early retirement. The letter was addressed to whoever finds this, and written by someone named Thomas Harding, the gas station's owner, from 1978 to 1985. The letter was brief. If you're reading this, it's woken again. I thought I'd stopped it. I thought I'd found a way. But it only sleeps, never dies. It takes them at 2:11 a.m. because that's when I first saw it. The night The sentence ended mid-thought. The rest of the page was blank, except for one final line at the bottom, written in what appeared to be a different pen, possibly added later. I'll be the next one. It's only fair. Records show Thomas Harding died in 1986, allegedly from a heart attack while driving on Highway 27, approximately 3 miles from the gas station. His death certificate noted the time, 2:11 a.m. Today, the lot where Harper's Gas and Go once stood remains undeveloped. The construction company that purchased the property went bankrupt in 2024. The site sits empty, marked only by a concrete foundation and the faded outline of where gas pumps once stood. Marcus Hayes, Jennifer Cole, and David Ortega have never been found. They remain on the missing persons database, their cases open but inactive. Detective Sarah Reeves, when asked in a rare interview in 2024, said simply, "Some cases aren't meant to be solved. Some doors, once opened, should never be investigated." The FBI's official conclusion states that the disappearances were likely the work of an organized criminal enterprise using sophisticated methods to stage abductions. But those who worked the case know the truth is far stranger than any official report. Because sometimes, in the dead of night, local residents driving past that empty lot report seeing something that shouldn't be there, lights flickering where no building stands, the shadow of gas pumps against the ground, and, just for a moment, always at exactly 2:11 a.m., the silhouette of someone standing behind a counter that no longer exists, serving customers who vanished decades ago. The night shift at Harper's Gas and Go is always hiring, but nobody ever completes their training. Some jobs, it seems, you don't leave, they leave with you. Imagine hearing your own name whispered through the trees, in a forest where you're supposed to be completely alone. What would you do? Would you answer? Would you run? Tonight, I'm going to tell you about 3 experienced hikers who made a decision that would haunt them forever. This is the true story of what happened in Blackwood Forest, a place where people go missing, and the woods themselves seem to be alive. What they discovered on that October night defies explanation. Are you ready to hear what really lurks in the darkness? Sarah, Marcus, and Elena had been planning this trip for months. They were seasoned hikers, not the type to get spooked by shadows or strange sounds. Blackwood Forest was their challenge, 40 miles of untouched wilderness, known for its rugged terrain and complete isolation. The locals had warned them, of course. "Don't camp past Marker 7, the old man at the ranger station had said, his eyes serious. "People who go deeper than that, sometimes they don't come back the same." The 3 friends had laughed it off. They'd hiked the Appalachian Trail, survived a blizzard in the Rockies, and camped in grizzly country. A few local legends weren't going to stop them. By the time they reached Marker 9, the sun was already setting. The forest had grown eerily quiet. No birds, no insects, just the sound of their boots crunching on fallen leaves. That's when Sarah first heard it. A faint whisper, barely audible over the wind. Her name, clear as day. Sarah. She stopped dead in her tracks, her blood running cold. "Did you guys hear that?" Sarah's voice trembled slightly. Marcus and Elena stopped, their headlamps cutting through the growing darkness. "Hear what?" Marcus asked, scanning the tree line. "Someone said my name. I swear I heard it." They stood in silence, listening. The forest felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. Then they all heard it. "Marcus." The whisper seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing through the trees like a corrupted recording. Elena's face went pale. What the hell was that? They wanted to believe it was the wind, their imagination, the exhaustion playing tricks. But then it happened again. Elena. 3 names, 3 whispers, all different directions. Marcus pulled out his satellite phone. No signal. They were miles from the nearest road, and darkness was falling fast. "We need to set up camp," he said, trying to sound calm. "Right here, right now. We'll figure this out in the morning." But deep down, they all knew. Something in Blackwood Forest knew they were there, and it knew their names. They found the abandoned campsite an hour later, just off the main trail. It was fresh, or at least it should have been. A tent, collapsed and torn, its fabric stained dark with something they didn't want to identify. Camping equipment scattered everywhere, a backpack with clothes spilling out, a sleeping bag ripped to shreds, cooking utensils covered in rust and moss as if they'd been there for years, not days. But the strangest thing was the journal. Elena picked it up with trembling hands, its pages damp and warped. The entries were frantic, the handwriting deteriorating with each page. Day 1, great hike, beautiful scenery. Day 2, heard strange sounds at night, probably just animals. Day 3, the whispers won't stop. They know our names. How do they know our names? Day 4, Michael is gone. He walked into the trees during the night, said the voices were calling him home. Day 5, we tried to leave. The trail keeps leading us back here. The forest won't let us go. The final entry was just one sentence, written in shaky capitals. They're not whispers, they're echoes of us. Elena dropped the journal as if it had burned her. Around the campsite, Sarah noticed something that made her stomach drop. Personal items that didn't belong to just one group. Dozens of name tags, licenses, photos, all from different people, spanning decades. This wasn't one abandoned campsite. It was a graveyard of lost hikers. They decided to make a run for it. Forget the gear, forget the route. They just needed to get out. But the forest had other plans. Every trail they took led them in circles, back to the same twisted oak tree with carvings in its bark. Names. Hundreds of names carved into the ancient wood, some fresh, some so old they were barely visible. And there, near the bottom, Sarah saw it, her own name, carved in the exact style of her handwriting. "This isn't possible," she whispered. "I've never been here before." But the evidence was there, undeniable. All 3 of their names, carved into the tree. Marcus checked his GPS. It was spinning wildly, unable to lock onto any satellites. His compass pointed in different directions every few seconds. They were lost, truly lost, in a place that seemed to exist outside normal reality. That's when the whispers became screams, not distant anymore, but close, right behind them, beside them, inside their heads. Sarah, Marcus, Elena, voices that sounded exactly like their own, calling out in terror and desperation. And then they saw them, figures between the trees, shadowy, translucent, moving with unnatural speed. As the figures got closer, the horrible truth became clear. They were looking at themselves. Dozens of versions of themselves, all trapped, all calling out, all trying to warn the next version of themselves about what was coming. The revelation hit them like a physical blow. Blackwood Forest wasn't haunted by ghosts or demons. It was caught in a temporal loop, a place where time folded in on itself, trapping anyone who ventured too deep. Every hiker who'd entered had become stuck, repeating their final days over and over, each iteration aware of all the previous ones. The whispers weren't calling them. They were warnings from their own future selves, echoes of the countless times they'd already been trapped here. The journal made sense now. Those hikers had realized the truth too late. They'd tried to escape, to break the cycle, but the forest always won. The abandoned campsites weren't from different groups. They were from the same group over and over again, across years, decades, maybe centuries of looped time. Elena understood it first. We're not going to escape, are we? We're already trapped. This moment, right now, we've lived it before. We'll live it again. As if in confirmation, the whispers changed. Now they weren't calling their names. They were repeating their exact words, their exact conversations from the past 3 days. The forest was playing back their own experiences to them, showing them the loop they were caught in. Sarah looked at the carved tree again and saw new scratches appearing below her name, carving themselves into the bark as she watched. Iteration 147. They'd been here 147 times before, and they couldn't remember any of it. The rangers found their car 3 weeks later, parked at the trailhead exactly where they'd left it. A massive search was conducted, but no trace of Sarah, Marcus, or Elena was ever found. The official report stated they'd likely gotten lost and succumbed to the elements. But sometimes, hikers who venture near Marker 7 report hearing voices in the darkness. 3 voices calling out in warning, "Don't go further, turn back, don't make our mistake." And on that ancient oak tree, deep in the part of Blackwood Forest where few dare to venture, 3 more names have been carved into the bark. Below them, a number keeps growing. Iteration 148, Iteration 149, Iteration 150 to the end of the sentence. The forest remembers. The forest always remembers. And it's still calling their names, night after night, loop after loop, forever trapped in those dark woods where time means nothing and escape is impossible. If you ever find yourself hiking in an unfamiliar forest and you hear your name whispered through the trees, don't answer, don't investigate, and whatever you do, run. Because once the forest knows your name, it might already be too late. You might already be trapped in your own iteration, living the same nightmare over and over, with no memory of how many times you've been there before.